Well, welcome to the next lecture on Mizmor Nevuchim. We were in the middle of chapter 52 in part 1, and in the Pines that was on page 116. And I'm going to give a little summary of where we were up to so that that everyone could just remember what Rambam was in the process of doing. What he's trying to accomplish in this chapter 52 is explaining the difficulty of describing God, that an attribute when God is described in the Torah. So in other words, Rambam has many times emphasized that when God is described in human form,
what's that?
Sorry, hold on. Sorry, I just muted everybody. Apologize for that. So he's explained to us many times that when it describes God in human form, it doesn't really mean the human form. It can't be that it's human form. That point's been made. But now he wants to go into the idea that attributes, that when certain qualities are attributed to God, that you can't attribute attributes. I'm sorry, I know that's repetitive, to God. And that's what he's getting at, except for one exception, which he's going to get to the end. When is it okay to attribute certain things to God? So in the way Rambam often does things is he divides everything into different categories so that just to help us understand the concept he's trying to teach. So in this chapter 52, what we read last time was he said, I'm going to list you 5 categories of attributes in general. And then I'm going to explain to you what you can and can't say when you're describing God. So at the end of the story, he's going to explain that every time the Torah attributes anything to God, it's only of a certain category, and that we're going to get to that point tonight. So the first 3 categories of attributes we discussed last lecture. I'm just going to review them really quick. Those 3 were any description of God's essence. So Rambam described what the essence of a human being was, and he used the philosophical explanation as a living being that thinks, that has intelligence. So but that's essence. You can't describe God's essence in any way. That's something that no attribution can ever describe God's essence. The second category was if you want to describe part of the essence. If you attribute a certain, you say there's a part of God is a certain thing. And we also couldn't say that because you can say a part of the essence of this table is that it has legs, but you can't say that about God, because once you say there's a part, then you say that he's composed of different parts. So that kind of attribute can't be used. The third one was a quality of a part of the essence of God. So for example, if you say that he's tall or short, or he has certain, he's nice, he's mean, he's big, he's small, anything that describes a quality is also a type of attribute. It's a way you can describe me in a certain way. You can say certain personality traits I might have. You can describe my physical characteristics or different qualities that I have, but you can't do that when it comes to God. So those first 3 categories absolutely cannot ever be attributed to God at all. Now, in the last line on page 116 in the Pines, he's going to describe a 4th type of attribute. And I'm going to give it away a little in the beginning. You also can't really attribute this to God, but Rambam is going to end up by saying this one, if someone really tries to attribute this to God, so whatever, it's not the end of the world. Don't get all worked up about it, but you really can't. So the 4th group of attributes is as follows. And it is predicated of a thing. Are you able to follow me? I'm using the hospital's Wi-Fi, and I want to make sure that it's working well, because I just got a little pop-up saying that it might be slow. Is everybody able to hear me? Yes? Okay. So it is predicated of a thing that has a relation to something other than itself. In other words, describing anything by how it relates to others. So for instance, it is related to a time or to a place or to another individual. So if you say, you describe Zayd, these are common things, like, and people that spoke Arabic would use these examples. If you're speaking Hebrew, you'd say Ruvain and Shimon. If you're speaking English, you'd say, Peter and Paul or whatever. So these are just names that he would use. If you predicate of Zayd, that he's the father of a certain individual. So you're not, or the partner of a certain individual, or an inhabitant of a certain place, or one who was at a certain time. So this kind of attribute doesn't necessarily entail multiplicity or change in the essence of the thing which is predicated. If you say that Joe is John's cousin, right? You didn't really say anything about Joe's essence, but you said the way that Joe relates to John. But you didn't change Joe's essence at all. You just described him by describing how he relates to something else. For the Zayd who is referred to, maybe the partner of Umar, the father of Bakr, the master of Khalid, or friend of Zayd, an inhabitant of such and such dwelling place, or one who was born in such and such a year. Those notions of relation are not the essence of the thing or something subsisting in its essence, as do the qualities. So I'm not saying Zayd has white hair, or Zayd has, is an angry guy, or Zayd is a nice guy, or Zayd is tall or short. I'm just saying, I'm describing Zayd as to how he relates to something else. Fine. At first thought, it would seem that it is permissible to predicate of God may have exalted attributes of this kind. So, for example, you can say, God is the creator of me, right? Or God is, so it sounds okay. This kind of attribute gives you the sense that maybe it's okay to describe God in that way. God is, however, when one knows true reality and achieves greater exactness in speculation, if you really think about it, this is problematic as well. The fact that this is impossible becomes clear. And why is that? There is no relation between God may be exalted and time and place. And this is quite clear. You can't describe God by saying he's been around forever. It sounds okay on the surface, but if once I say that he's around forever, that's problematic. Remember, Rambam is really being pure here in his philosophy. Why is that problematic? Because when you say that he's around forever, then you're saying that he relates to time, right? That what's forever to you and me, if you measure hundreds of billions of years, that's forever, or whatever, go to have back to the beginning of the universe, or the Big Bang, or whatever. Time is an accident attached to motion. We measure time based on motion. When the motion of priority and posteriority is considered in the latter, and when motion becomes numbered, as it is made clear in the passage, especially dealing with the subject. Motion, on the other hand, is one of the things attached to bodies, right? So you can only measure time by motion. Motion only relevant when you're talking to things. God may be exalted is not a body. God isn't a thing. So we can't measure God with time. Accordingly, there is no relation between him and time. And in the same way, there's no relation to him in place. Just like you can, when you describe, he is over there, right? So if you make a statement according to the Rambam, God is everywhere, which sounds like an okay statement to make, but it's not, because that's suggesting that God is in a place. Which place? Every place. But he's not in a place because he doesn't relate to place. So the subject of investigation and speculation is therefore the question whether there is between him, may he be exalted, and any of the substances created by him a true relation of some kind, so that this relation might be predicated of him. Anytime you try to relate to God and describe him in relation to the physical universe that we see, you're automatically getting yourself into trouble, Rambam is telling us. It is clear at first glance that there is no correlation between him and the things created by him. You can't say, right, that describe God with an attribute by describing how he relates to something that he created. And then he continues with this idea, but makes it even more clear. For one of the properties of two correlated things is the possibility of inverting the statement concerning them while preserving their respective relations, right? If I say that Zayd is Bakr's cousin, then I'm saying that Bakr is Zayd's cousin, right? If I say that I am my son's father, then I'm saying that from his perspective, that he is my son, right? Now he may be exalted, has a necessary existence, while that which is other than he has a possible existence. The entire existence of God is something that's necessary. And this is an idea, as we shall make clear. This is an idea that Rambam is going to get to later. But you can't say, even if you say that God is my creator, then it seems to sound like, then if you carry it to its logical conclusion, then God is the creator of me, that I'm giving God something by saying that he's the creator of me, which is problematic. But Rambam doesn't go too far deep into this. He says, I'll make that clear later. There accordingly can be no correlation between them. Because this is impossible, we can't even say there is any correlation in this way. As for the view, now this sentence here is translated very differently in the Hebrew. So I'm going to go with the Hebrew translation, which translates this sentence to V'hu davar she'efshar lachshov bo shehu nachon ve'eno kain, meaning, and this is something that one might think is okay to describe that way, but it's not true. In other words, what you might think is an okay, and it's actually something that we often do say. Even in the prayers, we often say things like this, but the Rambam says you might think it's okay, but it's not. For it is impossible to represent oneself that a relation subsists between the intellect and color. And the Rambam gives us examples in human things that we're used to. I mean, not human things, but physical things that we're used to that can relay this point. And that is, for example, let's say you wanted to make some sort of correlation between two concepts that there's no correlation. So if you describe the nature of the intellect by trying to compare it to a color, right? The intellect has nothing to, you can think in your intellect about colors, but the nature of the intellect has nothing to do with color, right? Although according to our school, both of them are comprised by the same existence, right? They both exist in this world, but you can't correlate one with the other. You can't describe intellect by describing the colors of it, and you can't describe color by describing intellect. They're two totally different things. How then can a relation be represented between him and what is other than he? If you can't correlate those two kinds of things, then how could you correlate God and something which is so different? You can't compare the two. There's no way, it just doesn't work. So in as much as existence, in our opinion, affirmed of him may be exalted, is other than he merely by way of absolute equivocation. Excuse me. I'm just going to take a cough drop. There is, in truth, I just turned the page, I'm on 118, no relation in any respect between him and any of his creatures. In actuality, there's no comparison between one and the other. For relation is always found between two things falling under the same necessarily proximate species. If you're describing, and he's, whereas there's no relation between two things if they merely fall into the same genus. So it's like trying to describe, well, he's going to give his own example, so I won't give mine. On this account, one does not say that this red is more intense than this green, or less or equally so, though they both fall under the same genus, namely color. You can compare red and green and say they're different colors, but you can't describe this red based on the green. They're two totally different things. If, however, two things fall into two different genres, there is no relation between them in any respect whatsoever. You can't say that just like this is a bright green, that's a bright red. If they're two different things, you can't describe them similarly at all. Not even according to the inchoate notions of common opinion. This holds even for cases in which the two things fall in the last resort under one higher genus. I'm going to kind of bump through this a little bit. For instance, there's no relation between 100 cubits and the heat that is in a pepper. I like this because I like eating hot peppers. So Rambam talks about hot peppers here. So if you want to tell me which hot pepper is hotter, a ghost pepper or a jalapeno pepper, right? You can't describe it to me in cubits, in amot, right? They're completely different things. You can't say it's 10 amot worth of hotness in the pepper. You have to describe it in pepper hotness, right? There's no relation either between knowledge or sweetness. You know, he's really smart. I measure his smartness in how much sweet he is. It's two totally different things. Or between clemency and bitterness. You know, how forgiving a person is versus how bitter something tastes. So even though they're all qualities, that you can't compare them. So if you can't compare those things by comparing one to the other, then God, who is so different, so completely other than his creations, how can you compare God by saying he's like humans in any way, shape, or form, even by saying how he relates to them? So given the immense difference between them with regard to the true reality of their existence, then which there is no greater difference. These two things, you can't possibly imagine anything more different than God and his creation. If a relation subsisted between them, it would necessarily follow that the accident of relation be attached to God. So I'm going to skip these next few sentences and just say them in my own words. So if someone says, right, that if someone tries to explain it, then they're necessarily going to end up giving God a quality, giving him what's called an accident here. But I said I liked using the Kapach's translation of the word as a mikra, or a physical quality, really, something that happens to be in God. And once you do that, we already explained in previous chapters that it's a problem. You can't describe God with a quality. If you say that God is powerful in relation to me, then you have to be measuring power. Then you have to be saying that he has power. Then if you're comparing it to me, then you mean that in my muscle strength, I can lift 20 pounds and God could lift 80 million pounds. But those are comparisons that don't make sense. The last sentence of this paragraph is really interesting. I'll read it in the English, but then I'll tell you in my own words. It says, however, it's actually two sentences from the end. Relation is an attribute with regard to which it is more appropriate than with regard to the others that indulgence should be exercised if it is predicated of God. This is Rambam's very fancy way of saying, if it is predicated of God, in other words, if you're walking around and somebody tells you something like this, right? God is very compassionate to me. The Rambam says, even though I just gave you a whole explanation as to why that's not an appropriate statement philosophically, indulge him, leave him alone. It's okay. This attribute, you don't have to be so zealous about like the other ones, right? This one, if a guy wants to say that God is compassionate to me, leave him alone, right? For it does not entail the positing of a multiplicity of eternal things. The person saying that isn't thinking in his mind that God is more than one, or God has divisions within him. He's just, what he really means is that he experiences compassion due to his relationship with God. So it's okay. Leave him alone. Don't get too worked up about it. So the first three, if a guy says, get worked up about it, tell him you're making a mistake. If you're trying to describe God as an A, a B, a C, you're off base. But if a guy tries to say that God is compassionate to me, God is nice to me, God is good to me, or if he's complaining, God is bad to me, the Rambam says, leave him alone, indulge him, let him say what he wants to say. But now, after all this, we're finally going to get to the category of attributes that's okay. And the reason, and this is really, really important, because once we learn this last one, we're going to know how Rambam understands all the attributes that are written in the Torah. Every time the Torah describes God, the Rambam understands it in this fifth category. But before I do that, I want to open the floor to any comments on the first four categories. So go ahead, I'm opening the floor.
Question, so are we about to get to the 13 attributes of God? Is that what this is leading us to?
The Rambam's going to give us the key to how you understand what it means when we give God third attributes. Yes, 13 attributes.
13, okay.
But not just the 13 attributes. Anytime Tanakh or Chazal describe God in any way, the Rambam will somehow have to fit it into this fifth category. Otherwise, in his book, it will be heresy, and that can't happen. There's going to be some that fit beautifully and some that might seem a little forced. But go ahead. We have other
did the Rambam say the prayer of Avinu Malkeinu?
I don't know how old the prayer is. I have to. That's
just an example of one of the prayers that we have.
Yeah. Well, the Rambam's idea of prayer we've touched on many times, and we're getting closer and closer to really discussing it in depth. Because Rambam has said that our prayer cannot change. He made that very clear. It can't change God, right? We can't affect God. We can't affect his behavior. So how does prayer work? What does prayer do? So, and it's Avinu Malkeinu is one example, but there's many prayers that seem to read and give the suggestion of something completely different. And as we build these ideas, we're building a structure so we can understand how Rambam approaches prayer and all of religion, everything we do, when we put on tefillin, when we daven, but we're getting there. But right now we're going to understand what it means when we tell God, you're merciful and kind and so on. What does that mean? So let's read it now. But there's a big build up to this, but it is really nice, and this is a really important idea of Rambam, which we're about to lay out. But before we read it, are there any other questions?
Yes, along the same lines, I'm just thinking of Anims Miros and other hymns that just are
I could tell you
anthropomorphic.
with almost certain anything that Rambam would very much not approve of Anims Miros. And I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't major and important and legitimate schools of thought in Judaism, especially the writer of Anims Mirot itself, that would disagree. But Rambam, it's impossible to imagine after learning more Nebuchim, that Rambam would approve of that kind of imagery. Even if you do explain that it's just imagery and it's just, Rambam would get really nervous or very mad by listening to God described in that way. Because why are we pushing a narrative that's so different from Rambam's concept of God? I mean, I know there's people out there that claim that Rambam was okay with Kabbalah, but it takes a tremendous amount of mental gymnastics to imagine Rambam being okay with that. And the only way to do it is to not learn more Nebuchim, learn the rest of Rambam, skip more Nebuchim, then you could pretend that. And thank you, Rabbi Hertzfeld. So Rambam definitely did not read Anims Miros because it wasn't around in his day. But you know, it is interesting, and we can maybe one day I'll give a series of lectures on Kabbalah for one thing. And Rabbi Hertzfeld and I had this conversation, but I couldn't accept it upon myself to do simply because I'm pretty occupied as it is. But one day, Blin Header, I want to get there. But it's certainly not Rambam's territory, despite what some people try to claim. But anyway, here we go. So let's do the fifth group. And this fifth group, this is what we can say about God. When we're describing God, what can we say? And what does the Torah mean when it does describe God? So here it goes. The fifth group of affirmative attributes is as follows. A thing has its action predicated of it. So we don't describe God, but we describe the action that he did. Right? So I do not intend to signify by the words his action, the habitus of an art that belongs to him who is described, as when you say, I don't mean that we call God like a carpenter or a smith, right? In other words, don't make the mistake of saying, if we say that God is a creator, you might be thinking in your mind, oh, I just gave him a title. I gave him a job description. God the creator. I could have said God the carpenter, God the blacksmith, God the shoemaker. No. Or God the world builder. That's not what I mean, Rambam says. Please don't make that mistake. That would go back to the fourth category. But what I mean is, in as much as this belongs to the species of quality, because that's a quality that you're not supposed to say. I can't just say that God is the creator means that that's a descriptor of God. But what I can say, what I intend to signify by the words is his action, the action that he who is described as performed. As when you say, Zayd is the one who carpentered this door. I look at a door and I say, who built that door? I say, Zayd did. I didn't describe Zayd at all. Did you hear that sentence carefully? It sounds like a small point, but it's really important. I didn't call Zayd a carpenter. I didn't say anything about how he made the door, why he made the door, how much doors could he make? How many doors did he make that day? I didn't say how much he charged for the door. I said nothing. All I did was say, when I'm looking at that door, who's the creator of that door? Zayd is. Now, when I look at the world and I says, who's the creator of the world? God is. Poof, that I'm allowed to say, because I said nothing about God himself. I said something about what he did. This is the crucial point here. As long as when you say something, you're saying nothing about God himself, that is appropriate. So this kind of attribute is remote from the essence of the thing of which it is predicated. It is completely separate from describing the thing which you're saying. For this reason, it is permitted that this kind should be predicated of God may be exalted. After you have, as shall be made clear, come to know that the acts in question need not be carried out by means of differing notions subsisting within essence. As long as you make it very clear, I'm not describing how God made the world. I'm not pretending that God made the world because he's the most powerful, best builder, most incredible architect ever in the history of the world. Once you start saying, no matter how many mosts and greatest and highest and wonderfulest and strongest and most, any descriptions like that, you're on the wrong track, says the Rambam. Stop that. And it's not because he's more powerful, because once you start calling him powerful, you're giving him descriptors of human being. But all you're allowed to say is that this world that is wonderful and amazing and incredible and complicated and beautiful and harsh and mean sometimes, and who made it? God. That you're allowed to say. Okay. So now, so then when you say something happened in the world that was awful, that was terrible, who caused that? God. Something happened in the world that was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Who made that happen? God. That is what you're allowed to say. And that is what every attribute of God really means when the Torah uses them. I jumped a little ahead in the words, but let me keep reading. So come to know that the acts in question need not be carried out by means of different notions subsisting within the essence of the agent, but that all his different acts, may he be exalted, are all of them carried by the means of his essence. All we know is that they happen because of what God is. What God is, I don't know. I can't describe that. I can't touch that. But whatever it is that he does, however he is in ways that we as human beings cannot possibly comprehend, that's how it happened. By means of a superadded, and not, as we have made clear, by means of a superadded notion, and not by something that you as a human being are trying to claim that's what God did. That's how he made it. Now think about the ramifications of this, because anytime someone tries to explain how God did this, how God does that, is already off the books by the Rambam. I would venture to say that something that we understand, and I'm not here to take sides, I'm just here to explain, because we need to understand Rambam. We're learning Rambam. When people say, when the Kabbalists, one of the most basic and important things that Kabbalists introduced into Judaism was that the essence of God is Tov, essence of God is good. When you read through Zohar, when you read through them, this is one of the basic ideas. Rambam would really, really not like that, right? That's a quality of God. You're saying something, you and I perceive something called good. That's not something that's relevant to God at all. That's already saying that God created this world out of chesed. When Chazal say statements that sound like that, Rambam would tell us they don't mean to describe God that way. They mean to say that this world is chesed, and the one that made that is God. This world is good, and the one that made that is God. And that's the important difference. So Rambam just brought us up to what kind of attributes are okay. In other words, attributes that aren't actually attributes of God himself. A summary of the contents. This is rare. Rambam doesn't always do this, but he wants to drive home this point. Would be as follows. He may be exalted, is one in all respects, no multiplicity should posit him, no notion that is superadded to his essence. The numerous attributes possessing diverse notions that figure in the scriptures, the time that the Torah and the prophets describe God in numerous ways, and that are indicative of him may be exalted, are mentioned in reference to the multiplicity of his actions. Every single time Rambam said that the Torah, and every time any one of the prophets describes God in any way, they're not describing God, even though it might sound like that, it might read like that, but that's not what they're doing, right? It's talking about what he does, right? And not because of the multiplicity subsisting in his essence, not because God has lots of different characteristics. And some of them, as we have made clear, also with a view to indicating his perfection, according to what we consider as perfection. And in some cases, they describe God in ways that we will experience as perfection. When they describe God as being great and strong, that's just simply to elevate in our hearts the feeling that we're used to. We're used to admiring things that are great and big. We're not used to admiring things that are puny and small. So they describe him that way in order to elicit those things. Rambam mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. We studied that together. As for the question whether it is possible that one simple essence in which no multiplicity is posited, so now Rambam is going to raise a quick question, which the answer shall be made clear by examples, which we're going to get to soon in future chapters. But this last sentence, I want to explain in my own words what he just said. It's a power-packed thing. Now we're going to get to the next philosophical step. Those of you that are following every week, we're building this philosophical structure of the Rambam. Every week builds on the last one. So right now, we've finally gotten to the point where Rambam has divested us of all human notions of God, all anthropomorphic notions. And then after taking human notions away, he took away all physical attributes, any way of describing God. And he finally told us how we can describe God. And now he says, well, if God can, he's bringing up a major philosophical question that all of the, medieval and Greek philosophers all dealt with. And that is, if God is one, and his essence is as simply one as I described. And I said, it's okay to say that he has different actions. Like I experience goodness one day, tomorrow I don't get the job I wanted and I experience badness, or what I interpret as badness. And then the next day I get, God forbid, ill, and then I interpret that as bad. And then the next day I win the lottery and I interpret that as good, right? How could one God that's so simple be responsible for so many different actions? So that's the next philosophical question, which we're going to deal with, but we're not going to deal with it today because I'm done for today. And we're going to open the floor for any comments.
I think you're great.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Anybody who want to ask any questions, add anything? Go ahead. Sorry.
In the Yom Kippur prayer, we attribute to God that he's the potter who makes us. So is this a prayer that the Rambam would not say?
Well, it's possible that he wouldn't, but what do you think? And if you don't want to answer, anyone could say, what do you think? How would the Rambam understand that prayer? Because he explicitly said, like he said, not to describe God as a carpenter, not describe God. So, but we have prayers that do. So how would he understand that prayer if he did say them? I mean, I wasn't in the Rambam's soul, so I'm not sure if those were part of his machzor or not. But let's say they were. What would he have said?
Well, the action of pottering is okay
Right.
to think about. The action.
Yeah, we experience it in that way, right? I mean, it says, God, we are like a pot in the hands of God, right? Right? Because that's the way that we experience God's actions, because God does affect our lives. God does affect everything of our life. He does form the shape and size and so on of our vessel that is our life, right? And so it doesn't mean that we can, God forbid, describe God as a potter, because that's a descriptor of God, but it is the way we experience it. And this is how Rambam would go through every part of tefillah and every chazal and every part of the Torah, right? The imagery can confuse you and can lead you in that direction, but it's important not to allow that to happen. I'm curious, and no one needs to answer this question now, but if someone does have something to say, if learning this until now has affected anyone yet in how they pray. Remember, how we pray is really the closest way we deal. I mean, it's the most personal way we deal with God on a regular basis. If we pray 3 times a day, once a week, once a year, however often we pray, this is a major part of how we relate to God. Has studying the Rambam changed at all the way we pray?
Well,
anyone want? Go ahead.
I'll just, it makes it a more confusing process for me.
Mm-hmm. It's simpler to believe that I pray and then God answers my prayer.
Well,
Right.
it also has, as I no longer think that I have any imagery that I should even for a moment think about. No Santa Claus, no physical imagery, and no time bound imagery. So as to describe God, if a child asked me, I would say I haven't the slightest idea and I would never learn it, and nor will you.
Right. Well, but that's maybe how the Rambam would want you to answer. Say that that's not something that we can explain.
One of the terms of prayer is, let's say you're in distress and you want something to change. So you pray to God that he affects that change for you.
Right.
But do you think that he will accomplish that for you?
So I mean, that's the difficult thing. Like it's nice to go to pray and think that if I pray to God, right, that God will change the outcome, right? He'll change what's happening. He'll do something for me. What Rambam would understand is much more along the lines of God created the world, however he did it, that's not something I'll understand. But he created the world in such a way that when I behave properly, when I act properly, when I change myself, when I change my attitude, the way I treat other people, the way I relate to God, the way I keep the laws of the Torah, when I live the way God instructed me to live, I have to mute everybody, sorry. When I do that, the world is constructed in such a way. God created a world in such a way that will bring out a better outcome. When I pray before God, I'm realizing my tininess in front of this vast, this concept that I can't even describe or understand, but I know that this is the world the way he made it. And he told us this in the Torah. He told us in the Torah what you need to do in order to make things better. And what you need to do is follow the rules of the Torah. And the process of prayer is a process of internalizing that message. It's a process of self-improvement and tapping into that energy, I guess, which says, this is how the world goes. You know, if you follow the stream, you're going to end up in the right place. If you don't, and you try to buck your own way and you do the wrong things and you don't follow the instructions I gave you, then you're going to end up in the wrong place.
Is it fair to, on that question, Jax, is it fair to say that it's permissible in the system that we're describing that Maimonides can't be 100% certain he's right? Okay, this is his structure, but maybe when you do ask God to make somebody cured, or the more traditional request that we have, okay, there's reason to question whether God can change in that fashion, but isn't it possible, wouldn't even Maimonides say maybe because he's not 100% certain. How can he be? He's not God. So can we have a little skepticism as we try to process this structure that's outlined here and say, well, maybe, probably it makes sense what Maimonides is saying, but maybe he's wrong.
Well, that's important. I think I'm glad you said that, because it's not so much a matter of right or wrong, but it is okay to say maybe he's wrong, because we all need to say that. And that is that there are other opinions, and there are plenty other people out there that would disagree with the Rambam. This class is devoted to Rambam, not prayer, right? If I wanted to give a class on prayer, then I would have to try to run the entire gamut of approaches to prayer, right? Many of which have a completely different outlook. The Rambam may even be okay with, on occasion, certain words of Chazal that might indicate very much different from what he's stating, because the Rambam has, and on occasion will, quote a Mishnah that seems to contradict the philosophical idea that he places, and said, yeah, I know that the Mishnah says that, but we don't paskin like that, you know, that we don't go that way. So in other words, he does that on occasions. One of the most famous ones is the Mishnah that states, if a person gets up to pray and says, Al kan sipar yagiu rachamecha, God, you had mercy on the bird, you know, they have to send away the mother bird, have mercy on us. And Rambam basically says, yeah, I know it says that, but because that contradicts his idea that is exactly why we should learn, you know, that did have mercy on the bird. It's going off this topic, but Rambam definitely does that. On the other hand, I'm sorry, there was a point I was trying to make. You were suggesting that Rambam might be wrong about it, and that, you know, yeah, and there are going to be places where it seems to contradict certain things. And right now, since we're studying Rambam and his approach, we have to try to understand how he would look at these approaches. And I see Leslie Kahn asked, so why are there prayers for rain, right? But this is really a much broader question. It's, you know, but rain is one of the most common parts we find throughout the Torah, most famously in Trei Asar, we find in Yoel, in the book of Yoel, is predicated on a prayer for rain, and find in the Gemara all the time. But I mean, on the simple level, the idea is that when we get together and pray, it's just the way the world is built, right? The world is made and designed by God in such a way that when we, as people, get together, we treat each other properly, we do tshuva, we repent of our evil and bad ways, that such a world is one in which there will be more rain. There's a lot I want to say about this, because I had some discussions about this specific subject of prayers for rain with Menachem Kellner, who's one of the leading Maimonidean scholars of the day. I've quoted him several times. So it'll take a while to really develop that thought. But the general idea that Rambam believed that a world in which people are acting properly is a world in which the economy is better, the farming is better, our water resources are used better, is a very there. It doesn't require a miracle from heaven to change the outcomes. And I'm not sure, should I go into this now in more depth, or should we leave it for another time? I mean, but just go ahead. I'm sorry, Harold.
Well, this to kind of reinforce the idea is sort of the distinction between tefillah and tachanun, and the Shemona Esrei is really, it's really a series of blessings of Hashem and thanking him, and it's actually there are no individual requests. It's all communal, and even there it's almost practically entirely praise as opposed to asking for things, whereas Tachanun is it's individual pleas, it's individual supplications, and it's very much sort of saying, look, woe are we're this downtrodden people, please do something for us. It's asking for things, and there's it's interesting, just looking it up, in Shema Kolenu in the Shemona Esrei, it says God hears both prayers and supplications, but then the blessing is, and God hears prayers. He does in the actual blessing, it omits the Tachanun because it's not clear whether God actually, we're not blessing God for hearing our supplications. That would be far too self-centered and self-important to do that. I think that's consistent with what the distinction that you're trying to draw. Yeah,
and I thank you for bringing that up. I think that's nice. I mean, the general idea, and I know this is going to leave also questions, but the general idea, and I see on the chat that Leslie's asking me to go into it, so I'll try to do the 5-minute version, and that is that, let me I'll say an example. So the Torah describes, in many places, that if you follow my rules and you keep the Torah and you do everything, then there's going to be rain, and everyone's going to have what to eat, and the land's going to produce what the land's supposed to produce, and your cows will give milk, and your sheep will give wool, and everybody will be happy. And if you don't behave, you don't do these things, all these terrible things are going to happen, right? Now, I'm not going to, there's many places in the Torah, especially Sefer Dvarim, where it says things along those lines. The way Rambam understands that is not so much that we do these things and therefore God spiritually answers us and makes the world better. However, what Rambam, the way, and he's going to describe this in very much detail in the 3rd chapter, where he describes the purpose of the laws of the Torah and the purpose of the communal law, the laws that apply to all of us, such as the laws of tithes, the laws of giving charity, the laws of giving a tenth to the poor, and so on. All of those laws were designed and created to create a society that works. So if you imagine the ideal utopia of the ideal Torah society where people are living according to the laws the way they're supposed to, it doesn't take a great leap to imagine all of a sudden that you're not going to have poverty. You're not going to have people that are starving and don't have what to eat. You're not going to have people that don't have a place to live. And even if maybe there's not that much rain that year, but if people are being nice and proper to each other, and then furthermore, if you take the Rambam's philosophy to its fullest extent, you have people that are intelligent and smart and study the world and understand the concepts of health and medicine, which the Rambam devoted his life to. So they're taking care of their bodies, so people are not getting ill as much. People are not getting sick. We have people, they're concerned about health. They're concerned, and yes, they're concerned about their environment. They study science, like Rambam would push, to study how to get better crop yields from fields, and if this is what humanity devoted themselves to, then we would have the utopia that the Torah promised. Not because that is, and prayer as a community creates that environment. And this is the entire purpose of the Torah, according to the Rambam. The purpose of the Torah is for us to keep it so that we have a better world. And and yes, it will create an environment where there's less illness, less hunger, less homelessness, all of these things. I know I might sound like a social justice warrior, but that's not an insult. This is, according to the Rambam, the kind of world that the Torah was trying to make us have. When the Torah says there shouldn't be usury, right, then it means that wealthy people shouldn't be taking advantage of poor people by crazy interest rates or predatory lending or so on and so forth. These are things, just imagine a society where people kept the purpose of the Torah. So yes, and prayer is an important part of it, because what do we do when we pray? We approach God, and we get the key thing that we do when we pray is humility. We recognize that we're nothing before God. God is, according to Rambam, God is so different from us that we can't even conceive of his greatness. We can't even imagine. It's so great that we can't even describe it. When we stand before an entity like that, I'm saying it's an entity because I have no other word to use, you can't help but feel incredibly humble. What happens to your selfishness then? Goes right out the window. What happens to your greed? Goes right out the window. What happens to your anger? It goes right out the window. And if everyone does that together, what happens to the world? Well, then, you know what? If there's a hunger because it's not raining, well, then you're able to talk to your neighbors. You find out where there are resources. You go import wheat from another country because you get along. You're not at war with them. You're not embargoing them. You're not shooting them. You're working together. And then you have a world, and poof, the hunger goes away. That's how Rambam understands all of these things. I know this is what I'm telling you is built from the structure of the Moreh Nevuchim, but we're getting there. And you can feel every time we study together, we put another brick on this building that the Rambam is trying to build for us. And then he stops in one area and he starts building a little bit over there, and then building a little over there, a little bit over there, until eventually we're going to have this structure, and you'll understand how he looks at the entire Torah. Anyway, I hope you don't mind that I went off on a tangent then. And hopefully next time we'll get together. We will, I want to make one more quick point. It's unbelievable that when you start learning this, you start thinking, what's going to happen to my spirituality? Like, what's going to happen to all of that? Because the Rambam is so logical and so rational, and so, and I said a few times in this forum, just hang in there and get this, and all of a sudden you'll see a spirituality that is 10 billion times more powerful than anything you've ever learned from another philosophy. And tonight you got a little taste of it. Anyway, so have a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining me, and looking forward to next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.